The city was quiet that night, the kind of silence that comes only after a long day. Streetlights flickered and most people were already inside their homes, safe and warm. But for Officer Emily Carter, the night had just begun. She was known in her department not only for her courage but also for her heart. Everyone respected her because she did her work with honesty and kindness. She treated people with fairness no matter who they were. And by her side, almost like her shadow, was Rex, her loyal German shepherd. Emily never called Rex just a dog. To her, he was her partner, her friend, and her family. Whenever someone asked about him, she would smile and say, "He's not just my canine partner, he's my family." The bond between them was something people could see in their eyes. When Emily walked into the station, Rex walked right beside her, his tail wagging proudly. When she left on duty, he was always alert, ready to face anything with her. That night, she checked her patrol car as she always did. She adjusted her vest, made sure her radio was working, and gave Rex a small pat on the head. "Ready, boy?" she whispered. His ears perked up, and he let out a soft bark as if to say, "Always." The two of them rolled out into the streets, just as they had done hundreds of times before. The night began calmly. They drove through empty streets, past small shops with lights turned off and houses where families were asleep. Emily hummed softly to herself, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on Rex's back. For her, these moments were peaceful, a reminder that safety meant something. She knew the city wasn't perfect. Trouble could break out any time, but she also believed her job was to stand between danger and the people she served. After an hour on patrol, the radio crackled. A voice came through, urgent and sharp. "Unit 14, possible armed disturbance near 7th Street. Shots reported. Proceed with caution." Emily's heart tightened, but she didn't hesitate. She switched on the siren and headed toward the location. Rex lifted his head immediately, alert, his sharp eyes fixed on the road ahead. The streets grew narrower as they entered the old part of town. The sound of the siren echoed off the buildings, bouncing into the night. When Emily turned the corner onto 7th Street, she saw people running, shouting in panic. Some ducked behind cars, others hurried away from the flashing lights. A small group of masked men had created chaos, and one of them fired into the air. The sound slicing through the night air like thunder. Emily parked quickly and stepped out, her hand firm on her weapon but her voice calm and steady. "Police, drop your weapons," she commanded. Rex leapt from the car, standing at her side, his deep growl warning anyone who dared to come closer. For a moment, it felt like time froze. The men looked at each other, unsure. One lowered his weapon, but another raised it higher. Before Emily could react, shots rang out. The first bullet whizzed past her, striking the wall. She ducked, pulling Rex closer, but then another shot cracked. Emily felt a burning pain in her side, sharp and deep. She fell to the ground, her breath catching. The world spun, the sound of sirens and shouting fading into a blur. Rex barked wildly, lunging forward to shield her. He stood between her and the chaos, refusing to move even as the officers arrived for backup. In those terrifying moments, Emily's strength began to fade. Her vision blurred and her body felt heavy. But even in her weakness, she managed to whisper something to the paramedics who rushed to her side. Her words were not about herself, not about her wound, but about Rex. "Please, take care of my dog," she whispered, her voice trembling. The paramedics worked quickly, pressing against her wound, lifting her onto the stretcher. Blood stained her uniform and her breathing was weak. Yet the one thing she kept repeating over and over was about Rex. "Don't leave him. Please promise me." Her words were filled with desperation, like a mother worried for her child. The officers who had rushed in took control of the scene, securing the area and handcuffing the suspects. But their eyes kept glancing toward Emily and her partner. They knew the bond she had with Rex, and hearing her whisper for him broke their hearts. As the ambulance doors closed, Rex barked and tried to jump inside. The paramedics stopped him gently, but his body shook with worry. He scratched at the door, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't understand why they were taking his human away from him. Back at the station, another officer held on to Rex, trying to calm him down. But the dog was restless, pacing the floor, ears pricked toward the direction of the hospital. He whined, barked, and pulled at the leash. It was as if he knew something terrible had happened. Everyone in the department could feel the weight of the moment. The officer who was always strong, always brave, now lay fighting for her life. And the dog who was always fierce now trembled like a child separated from their parent. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Doctors rushed Emily into the emergency room. Her condition was critical. They worked quickly, their hands moving with practiced skill. Tubes, machines, and urgent voices filled the room. Yet even as she drifted in and out of consciousness, Emily's lips moved with one name. "Rex, Rex," she whispered, tears mixing with the sweat on her forehead. The nurses exchanged looks, touched and shocked. They had seen patients in pain, patients calling for family, but never had they seen someone so worried about a dog while her own life hung by a thread. Hours passed, and the night turned into morning. Emily's condition was still unstable. She remained under close watch, her heartbeat weak but fighting. The doctors did everything they could, but what lingered in their minds was her plea, not for herself but for Rex. At the same time, Rex refused to rest. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't lie down. He stared at the door, waiting, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. Whenever someone tried to comfort him, he turned away, his eyes locked on the exit as if willing it to open and bring her back. The officers at the station whispered about it. They all agreed. This dog wasn't just a partner. He was her soul's companion, and he knew something was wrong. By the time the sun rose, both the hospital staff and the police department carried the same thought in their hearts. Emily's fight was not hers alone. Somewhere across the city, a loyal German shepherd was fighting with her in his own silent way. And deep down, everyone wondered, could the strength of that bond somehow help bring her back? The ambulance raced through the dark streets, sirens cutting through the silence of the early morning. Inside, doctors and nurses worked quickly, doing everything they could to keep Officer Emily alive. Her breathing was shallow and her pulse dropped dangerously low more than once. Every second mattered, but even in that fragile state, her lips moved softly, whispering the same plea again and again. "Please, don't forget my dog. Promise me he's safe." The doctors exchanged glances, surprised. Most patients in her condition begged for their family or for their own life, but she thought only of her German shepherd. One of the nurses leaned down and reassured her. "He's fine, he's safe. Don't worry." The words seemed to calm her slightly, but her hand twitched weakly as if trying to reach for someone who wasn't there. At the hospital, the emergency team rolled her straight into surgery. The injury was severe. The bullet had torn into her side, missing her heart by only a few inches. Hours passed as surgeons worked tirelessly. The hallways outside were filled with officers waiting for news. Some sat with their heads in their hands, others stood silently, their faces pale. They all knew how much Emily meant to the department. She was more than just a colleague. She was a sister to many of them. And they also knew how much Rex meant to her. Back at the police station, Rex paced restlessly inside his kennel. The officers had tried everything, food, toys, even a blanket that smelled like Emily, but nothing worked. He refused to eat, his nose pushing the bowl away. He barked and whined, scratching at the door, his eyes fixed on the exit. He wanted to be where she was. He could sense she was hurt, and every fiber of his body told him he should be at her side. Officer Daniels, one of Emily's closest friends, stood by the kennel with tears in his eyes. "He knows," Daniels whispered to another officer. "He can feel she's not okay." Rex let out a deep, mournful howl that sent chills through everyone in the room. No one doubted it anymore. The bond between Emily and her dog was something far beyond ordinary. As dawn broke, the doctors came out of surgery, their faces tired but hopeful. They told the officers that Emily had made it through, but her condition was still critical. "She's stable for now, but the next 48 hours are very important," the surgeon explained. The officers sighed with relief, but their worry wasn't gone. One of the nurses added, "Even when she was unconscious, she kept saying the same thing, 'my dog.' It's the only thing on her mind." When word of this reached the station, Daniels spoke up. "Then we need to bring Rex to her." At first, the idea sounded impossible. Hospital rules were clear: no animals in the ICU. The environment had to stay sterile, and bringing in a dog was unheard of. But Daniels wasn't ready to give up. He knew his friend better than anyone. If she's holding on for him, then maybe he's what she needs to get through this, he argued. The debate began. Some officers agreed immediately, insisting that Rex's presence could give Emily strength. Others were hesitant, worried about breaking the rules or interfering with her care. Finally, Daniels picked up the phone and called the hospital director. His voice was calm but full of determination. "She's not just any officer," he said. "She's been protecting the city for years. If her last wish is to see her dog, then we should make it happen. Please, just give us this chance." At the hospital, the staff gathered to discuss the request. Nurses shared what they had witnessed, that even in her weakest moments, Emily's thoughts were on Rex. Some admitted they had seen patients improve when surrounded by loved ones. "Who are we to say that her dog isn't the most important part of her recovery?" one nurse asked. But others worried about the risks. It was a difficult decision. Meanwhile, Rex continued to grow restless. He pulled at the leash so hard that the officer holding him nearly lost his grip. His eyes looked desperate, his nose pressed against the door as if he could smell where Emily had been taken. Every whine, every bark felt like a plea of his own. "Take me to her. She needs me." By afternoon, Daniels returned to the station with news. "The hospital said they'll think about it," he told the team. "They've never allowed anything like this before, but they're considering it because of her condition." A flicker of hope spread among the officers. Everyone knew it was more than just about rules now. It was about giving Emily the strength to keep fighting. That night in the ICU, Emily's condition dipped again. Her heartbeat slowed and her breathing became irregular. The machines beeped in warning and doctors rushed to her side. They stabilized her after several tense minutes, but the fear in the room was clear. Her body was losing the strength to keep going. One nurse whispered softly, "She needs something more. She needs her dog." Finally, late in the evening, the hospital director made the call. "Bring the dog," he said simply. It was a risk, but it was also an act of compassion. The officers at the station nearly cried with relief. Daniels immediately volunteered to bring Rex. When Rex was led out of the station, his energy changed instantly. His tail wagged, his steps quickened, as if he knew he was finally being taken where he belonged. As they drove through the quiet streets toward the hospital, Daniels looked at the dog beside him. "Hang on, buddy," he said softly. "She's waiting for you. Don't let her down." Rex's ears perked up at the sound of his human's name, and he let out a low, eager bark. At the hospital entrance, nurses and security guards waited nervously. They had cleared a path through the hallways, making sure everything was safe. Daniels clipped the leash tighter, but he could feel the strength of Rex pulling forward. The moment the ICU doors opened, Rex surged ahead, his paws clicking on the floor, his nose leading him straight to her room. Doctors and nurses watched in awe as the determined animal moved with purpose, as if guided by something unseen. When he reached the bed, Rex froze for a moment. His eyes softened, his ears lowered, and he climbed gently onto the edge of the bed where Emily lay pale and weak. He rested his head against her arm, his breath warm against her skin. At that very moment, something unbelievable happened. The monitors next to her bed steadied. Her pulse grew stronger. Her breathing calmed. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the machines. Doctors exchanged wide-eyed glances. A nurse whispered, "Did you see that?" Her vitals changed the second he touched her. For the first time in days, the ICU was filled not with fear, but with a glimmer of hope. The ICU room was usually a place of silence where the steady rhythm of machines filled the air. But that night, something extraordinary had entered the space. Rex, the German shepherd who had refused to leave his partner's side, was finally allowed in. As he placed his head gently on Emily's arm, everyone in the room saw the monitors respond. Her heartbeat steadied, her breathing grew calmer, and the faint color that had been missing from her face seemed to return. The nurses and doctors looked at one another in disbelief. None of their medicines or machines had caused such an instant change, yet this dog's presence did. Emily remained unconscious, her body still weak from surgery, but there was no denying what had happened. It was as if her soul recognized that her loyal companion was finally with her. The doctors, who had been skeptical about bringing an animal into such a critical space, stood silently. For once, science didn't have the answer. A nurse whispered softly, "It's like she's been waiting for him." Rex stayed perfectly still, his large brown eyes watching every small movement she made. He didn't bark, he didn't fidget, as though he understood that this moment required gentleness. His head rested on her arm, his ears lowered, and his chest rose and fell slowly in rhythm with hers. Every time her breath faltered, he nudged her hand with his nose as if reminding her to keep fighting. The doctors noted the readings carefully. Her oxygen levels had improved slightly, and her heart rate no longer dropped dangerously. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to give hope. One of the senior doctors turned to Daniels and said quietly, "You were right. She needed him." Word spread quickly through the hospital. Staff from other departments came to the ICU, curious about the story of the officer and her dog. Some stood by the glass window outside the room, watching in silence as the animal lay faithfully beside her. Even patients' families who overheard the story felt moved. In a place usually filled with fear and sadness, this moment brought something rare: hope. Hours passed, but Rex didn't move from his spot. He refused food or water, only lifting his head when Emily stirred faintly. Once, her fingers twitched against his fur, and though her eyes didn't open, the small movement made the room erupt in quiet gasps. Daniels leaned over to the nurse. "Did you see that?" She felt him. The nurse nodded, her own eyes misty with emotion. Late into the night, the ICU staff rotated shifts, but no one dared to ask Rex to leave. They had all seen what his presence had done, and no one wanted to disturb the fragile miracle taking place. Daniel stayed by the door, watching, his heart heavy but full of hope. He remembered all the times Emily had joked that Rex was smarter than most people in the department. At that moment, he believed it. In the quiet hours before dawn, Emily's condition wavered again. Her monitors beeped erratically, and doctors rushed into the room. They adjusted her IV, checked her wound, and prepared for the worst. But Rex stood up suddenly, pressing his body closer to hers. He let out a low whine, a sound full of sorrow and love. His warm breath touched her cheek, and against all odds, her reading slowly began to stabilize again. The doctors stopped, their hands frozen in disbelief. "Unbelievable," one of them whispered. "It's as if he's pulling her back." The nurse at her side smiled softly through tears. "She's not alone anymore. That's why." As the night faded into morning, Emily remained in critical condition, but the doctors were more hopeful than they had been before. Rex had given her something medicine couldn't: comfort, strength, and the will to keep going. Meanwhile, outside the ICU, more officers had gathered. They had heard the updates, and though they couldn't go inside, they waited quietly in the hallway. Some brought food and coffee for the staff. Others stood silently, their uniforms neat, their expressions solemn. They weren't just there for Emily. They were there because they believed in the bond between her and her dog. Inside the room, Daniels finally stepped closer, crouching beside Rex. He stroked the dog's back gently. "She's fighting, buddy. Don't let go now." Rex's tail wagged faintly, but he didn't take his eyes off Emily. As the hours stretched on, the atmosphere in the ICU began to change. The doctors, who were usually focused on numbers and charts, found themselves quietly rooting for something bigger. Nurses walked in with softer steps, as if respecting the sacred bond between human and animal. One of them even whispered to Emily while checking her IV. "He's here, Emily. Your Rex is here. Don't give up." Emily's body was still weak, but there were signs of small improvements. Her breathing grew less strained. Her color improved, and once her lips parted as though she wanted to speak. The only word she seemed to shape was Rex. The room fell silent as the dog leaned closer, licking her hand gently. For a moment, it almost looked like she smiled. Doctors began documenting everything. It was unusual for them to admit that something beyond their control could affect a patient's condition. But this was undeniable. Some of them even wondered if they were witnessing proof of what love and loyalty could do. By afternoon, Rex was allowed to stay permanently. The hospital staff set up a small mat by her bed, though he refused to use it. Instead, he chose to remain pressed against the side of the bed, his eyes locked on her face. The ICU, once filled with only machines and urgency, now carried a strange sense of peace. Visitors who passed by the hallway often stopped to watch. Some took pictures, others just stood with tears in their eyes. The story of the officer and her loyal dog began to spread outside the hospital walls, reaching local news reporters. But for those inside the room, none of that mattered. What mattered was that Emily was still fighting, and Rex was helping her do it. That evening, Emily's family arrived. Her parents and younger brother entered the ICU quietly, their faces full of worry. They froze when they saw Rex on the bed beside her. Her mother placed a hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. "He never left her," she whispered. Her father, usually a man of few words, wiped his eyes and muttered, "He's protecting her even now." They thanked Daniels and the staff for allowing Rex to be there. "She would never forgive herself if something happened to him," her brother said. "He's the reason she's holding on." As night fell again, Emily's condition remained fragile but steady. Each breath she took seemed tied to the gentle rhythm of Rex's presence. The doctors couldn't explain it. The staff couldn't stop talking about it. And the officers outside found renewed strength in it. And though Emily's eyes were still closed, her body seemed to respond to the silent message that Rex gave her. I'm here. I'm not leaving. You're not alone. The days in the ICU turned into a test of patience and hope. Every morning, the doctors checked Emily's condition with careful eyes. Her body was still weak, and her fight for life was far from over. But there was one thing that had become clear to everyone. Rex's presence made a difference. The German Shepherd never left her side, even when nurses and doctors moved around her bed. He adjusted himself, staying close but never getting in the way, almost as if he understood what was happening. Whenever her vitals dipped, Rex would react first. He would whine softly, press his nose against her hand or nuzzle her arm. More than once, the staff noticed that her readings improved right after. It was impossible to explain medically, but they all felt it. This dog wasn't just a visitor. He was part of her healing. The hospital had never experienced anything like this before. The staff who were once hesitant about letting a dog into the ICU now defended his right to stay. He's doing what we can't, one nurse said. He's giving her the strength to keep going. Even patients in other rooms who heard about the story felt inspired. Some whispered to their families, saying they wanted to fight harder too, because if an officer could keep going for her dog, then they could keep going for their loved ones. But the road was not smooth. On the fourth night after surgery, Emily's condition suddenly took a bad turn. Her heart rate dropped, alarms rang, and the room filled with doctors rushing in. They worked quickly, adjusting her medicines, preparing for emergency intervention. Daniels, who was outside the room, froze in fear. His hands shook, his throat dry. He thought this might be the end. Rex sensed the danger immediately. He jumped onto the bed, careful but desperate, and pressed his body against Emily's side. He let out a sound that shook everyone in the room, a long, low howl that was filled with sadness and fear. His head rested on her chest and his ears flattened as if begging her not to leave. At that moment, something unexpected happened. Her heartbeat, which had been fading, began to climb again. Slowly, the beeping on the monitors steadied. The doctors stopped, stunned. They had been seconds away from drastic action. But her body had responded on its own. One of the younger nurses wiped her eyes and whispered, "He's pulling her back again." No one dared to argue. Everyone in the room had seen it with their own eyes. After the crisis passed, the doctors allowed Rex to stay even closer. They placed a blanket over the edge of the bed so he could rest comfortably beside her. He refused to sleep for long, but when he did, it was with one paw gently touching her hand as if making sure she was still there. Word spread outside the hospital. Local news channels picked up the story, calling it a miracle bond between an officer and her canine partner. People sent flowers, cards, and messages of support to the hospital. Strangers who had never met Emily prayed for her recovery. They wrote notes saying things like, "Hold on for your dog, he needs you," and "You're both heroes." Inside the ICU, Emily's family visited often. Her mother sat quietly at her bedside, stroking her daughter's hair while Rex lay on the other side. Her father, a man hardened by years of work, found himself whispering prayers. Her younger brother spoke to her every day, telling her stories about home, hoping she could hear him. Through it all, Rex never moved far. The family came to understand that he was part of Emily's heartbeat now. One evening, when her condition dipped again, Rex placed his paw gently on her chest. The staff gasped when they saw her hand twitch in response, as if she wanted to hold him. Her eyes fluttered open for the briefest moment, not fully awake, but enough for everyone to see. The nurse called out softly, "Emily, can you hear us?" "He's here. Rex is here." Her lips trembled, forming a faint smile before she slipped back into sleep. The entire room exhaled in relief. It wasn't much, but it was proof that she was still fighting. The hospital staff began to believe in something they hadn't before, the healing power of love and loyalty. For years they had relied on medicine, machines, and skill, but now they witnessed something beyond that, a bond so strong it could touch life itself. One of the doctors later said, "I've practiced medicine for 30 years, but I've never seen anything like this. That dog may be the best medicine we have." As days turned into a week, Emily's progress became slow but steady. She was still fragile, but she no longer hovered at the edge of life. The ICU staff noticed that her improvement always came when Rex was near. It wasn't just coincidence, it was connection. The once skeptical director of the hospital admitted, "We took a risk letting the dog in, but now I know it was the right choice." The other patients and their families also found comfort in Rex's presence. Some said his loyalty reminded them of their own loved ones waiting at home. Others said they felt stronger just by knowing such devotion existed. The story wasn't just Emily's anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed hope. Late one night, Daniels walked into the ICU quietly. He saw Rex lying beside Emily, his eyes half closed but his ears still alert. Daniels sat down next to him and whispered, "You saved her more times than we could count. Don't stop now, buddy." Rex lifted his head and looked at him, his eyes shining as if he understood. The hospital became a place of whispers and prayers, not just for Emily's recovery but for the bond that had moved everyone's hearts. Each day the nurses updated her charts, but they also wrote little notes of encouragement and left them on her bedside table. "Keep fighting. We believe in you. Rex is proud of you." For Emily's family, seeing Rex at her side gave them comfort. They knew she wasn't alone, not even in the quiet hours of the night. They believed deep down that if anything could bring her back, it was the presence of the dog who loved her more than life itself. The climax of this chapter came when Emily's condition dipped one more time. The alarms rang, and her body grew weak again. Doctors rushed in, preparing to intervene. But Rex reacted with fierce determination. He climbed onto the bed, pressed his body closer, and licked her face gently. Everyone froze as the monitor steadied once again. It wasn't science, it wasn't logic, it was love. Tears filled the eyes of hardened doctors and nurses alike. The ICU was silent, except for the steady beeping of the monitor. Daniels whispered, "She's going to make it. He won't let her go." And in that moment, everyone believed it. The days slowly turned into weeks, and each morning brought a little more hope to the ICU. Emily was no longer on the edge between life and death, though she was still weak. The doctors watched carefully, recording every small improvement. They knew recovery would be long, but the most important thing was that she was fighting. And everyone agreed she wasn't fighting alone. Rex had stayed with her through it all, never leaving, never losing faith. By now, Rex had become part of the hospital family. The nurses brought him water bowls and even a soft blanket, though he always chose the floor near her bed instead of resting anywhere else. When he finally slept, it was with one paw stretched up to touch her arm, as if he was reminding himself she was still there. The doctors, who had once doubted, admitted openly that Rex was no ordinary dog. His loyalty had changed everything. One morning, as sunlight streamed through the blinds, Emily stirred more strongly than before. Her eyes opened slowly, blinking at the light. At first she seemed confused, lost between dreams and reality. Then she felt something warm and soft against her hand. She turned her head and saw Rex lying beside her, his big brown eyes staring back at her with love and relief. For a moment she simply looked at him, tears filling her eyes. "Rex," she whispered, her voice weak but full of emotion. The sound of her voice made Rex jump up, his tail wagging wildly for the first time in weeks. He let out a soft bark, then licked her hand gently, almost afraid to hurt her. The nurses gasped, rushing to her side. "Emily, can you hear us?" one asked softly. Emily's lips trembled into the faintest smile. "I can, and I see him," she whispered. It was the moment everyone had prayed for. For days, the doctors had waited to see signs of her waking fully, and now it had happened. The ICU staff stood silently, some with tears in their eyes. They had witnessed many recoveries, but this one felt different. It felt like a miracle. Her family rushed into the room not long after. Her mother cried as she kissed Emily's forehead. Her father held her hand tightly, whispering, "You scared us, sweetheart, but you're back now." Her younger brother smiled through tears, saying, "We never left you, and neither did Rex." Emily looked from one face to another, but her gaze always returned to her dog. "You stayed," she whispered to him. "You always stay." The following days were filled with slow recovery. Emily could only speak a few words at a time, but every time she did, she mentioned Rex. Nurses often found her stroking his fur with weak fingers, whispering softly to him. She told him about the nights she felt him near, even when she couldn't open her eyes. "I knew you were here," she told him one evening. "You kept me alive." The hospital staff also noticed a new energy in the ICU. Other patients, hearing the story, asked to meet Rex. Doctors allowed short visits, and the dog seemed to sense when someone needed comfort. He would walk gently to their side, lay his head on their lap, and let them feel his quiet strength. People began to say that Rex wasn't just saving Emily, he was helping the whole hospital heal. Local news stations shared the story widely. Headlines called it the dog that brought his officer back and the miracle of loyalty in the ICU. People from across the country sent letters, cards, and even small gifts for Rex. Children sent drawings of a brave German shepherd standing beside a hospital bed. Retired officers wrote messages of encouragement, saying Emily's fight gave them courage too. But for Emily, the greatest gift was simply opening her eyes each morning and seeing Rex there. She began to regain her strength little by little. At first it was just a few minutes sitting up in bed, then moving her arms, then trying to stand with help. Through it all, Rex was there, tail wagging, eyes filled with pride. He walked beside her when she took her first shaky steps, as if guarding her from falling. The staff joked that he was better than any physical therapist. Weeks later, Emily was finally moved out of the ICU into a regular room. The staff gathered to watch, clapping softly as she was wheeled out with Rex walking proudly beside her. For them, it was more than just a transfer. It was proof of what they had all witnessed. The director of the hospital, who had once questioned the decision, admitted publicly, "Sometimes healing comes from love." This officer and her dog have shown us that. During her recovery, Emily often reflected on what had happened. She remembered the darkness, the moments when she felt like slipping away. "I could hear him," she explained to her family. "Even when I couldn't open my eyes, I knew he was there. His voice, his touch, it kept pulling me back." Her family listened with tears, knowing that Rex had been more than a comfort. He had been her lifeline. The bond between them became a symbol in the community. Schools invited Emily to speak once she was stronger. Not about bravery in battle or catching criminals, but about love, loyalty, and never giving up. She always brought Rex with her, letting children pet him, telling them, "This is the hero of my story." When she finally returned to the police department months later, the entire force gathered to welcome her back. Officers stood in rows, applauding as she walked slowly into the station with Rex at her side. Banners hung on the walls saying, "Welcome back, Emily and Rex." Tears filled her eyes as she hugged Daniels and the others. "I wouldn't be here without him," she said, pointing to Rex, who barked proudly. That day, the chief of police announced that Rex would receive a special Medal of Honor for his loyalty and bravery. During the ceremony, Emily held back tears as the medal was placed on his collar. The crowd clapped and cheered, but Rex only looked up at Emily, wagging his tail as if to say, "I did it for you." Life slowly returned to normal, though nothing would ever feel quite the same. Emily carried scars from her injury, but she also carried a deeper understanding of what it meant to be alive. She often said that while doctors saved her body, Rex saved her soul. Whenever people asked her how she survived, she would smile and reply, "Because he refused to let me go." The story of Emily and Rex spread far beyond their city. People around the world read about the critically injured officer who whispered for her dog, and the dog who helped bring her back. The message was clear. Love has power, and loyalty can heal wounds that medicine alone cannot. In the end, what remained most powerful was the sight that doctors, nurses, and officers would never forget: an injured woman lying in a hospital bed, and the faithful dog who refused to leave her side, who kept her heart beating with his love. It was not just a story of survival, but a story of hope, reminding everyone that sometimes the strongest medicine in the world comes from the simplest place, the bond between a human and her dog. And so, as Emily stood once again in uniform, with Rex sitting proudly by her side, the world knew that their story would live on, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a living proof that love, loyalty, and courage can create miracles.